All right. Good afternoon, everyone. It looks like we still have some attendees who are filtering in, but I want to be respectful of everyone's time and get started. So today we have the absolute pleasure of welcoming Dr. Nikki Von Lockett, an associate professor of public policy and African American studies here at Penn State. She is going to talk to us about diversity, equity, and inclusion through the lens of our alumni mentor program. So with that, I will let her introduce herself and take it from here.
Hello, everyone. I'm Nikki, and I'm glad you're joining us today. Thank you so much for your time and interest in this. I understand this is voluntary, so that means you think this is important and care about it, and so do I. So I'm glad to have a conversation with you today about it. I'm going to try and make this less lecture-like. I'm hearing, whew, thank goodness, I'm hearing it. But try to when I have these conversations, we did this with our graduate students in the School of Public Policy at the beginning of this year, and people really want to talk through these issues. They want to talk through their experiences, their questions, their concerns, Lauren and I were just talking about optimism. And so I want to do that. I want to share some things that I've learned, some things that we know from a research literature that helps us. So I'll do that, but I want to do that as part of working through some questions you have and what is motivating your interest in this. So what I'll do is I'll ask you to start off by putting some of those questions, if some of you, or scenarios. I like to work through scenarios, and I'm going to share a few with you, and they're real. This is a true story. I'm going to share a few of those, and then as you think of scenarios yourself that you've encountered, something you didn't know how to negotiate, something you were thought you could have done better, or something that made you uncomfortable, I want you to, or questions you have, I'd like you to put those in the chat now if there are some things that strike you in that way, or if they strike you throughout our conversation. Does that sound good? Yes, that's a great idea. We love it. Okay, good. Okay, Zoom is this particular format can be so uninteractive, but Lauren's I'm gonna talk for a bit, and then we're gonna see if we can make it such that we're gonna try to let people actually talk, unmute themselves, etc. Okay. Okay, so one, it's a dreary day. You're alumni and you're actively involved in giving and service back to your alma mater. That means you love this university and you have fond memories. So I'm just going to share with you that today I am here at State College. It is gloomy and dreary. It's one of those days. However, I'm looking out my office window. It is a gloomy day, but I must say that we have had several weeks of just glorious fall. And how many of you remember fall is the season for Central PA? I don't know how many of you are here, maybe in Central PA or in the area, but most of you are likely scattered about. And do you remember how glorious the fall was here? We have had breathtaking fall over the past few weeks. It just stopped 2 days ago. And then we have a gloomy fall, but it's been beautiful. So I wanted to share that with you. Okay, so and thinking about dealing with thinking about some of these issues. Okay, so I want to share. I'm fascinated. So Deloitte & Touche, I'm gonna approach thinking about this from the perspective of diversity management. This is where I've taught from a number of years, and in the management field, and in management, both in the private sector and in the sort of HR, management school HR context, and now in public sector management and a public policy school. So I'm going to approach a lot of this in that way, particularly because you all are interested in careers and work. That's the service that you're providing. So I'm going to share this survey. This was a survey by Deloitte & Touche. And this has just stuck in my mind for so long to sort of orient, why does this matter? Why are we gathered here, and why are we trying to work through these questions? Okay, so let me share my screen. We're gonna have a little technological break here for just a second. Let me share my screen. Okay, share. Okay, so you should be able to see, and let me know if you don't, but you should be able to see a PowerPoint. I'll put it in a presentation mode.
You're good, Nikki. I can see it. So
Perfect. Thank you so
yep.
much, Lauren. Okay, so this is the survey. Here's the piece that I thought was interesting. So this is a survey that tells us one about the change in our workforce that's coming very quickly. We've heard a lot about our workforce diversifying. So this has been a piece in diversity management that our workforce is just simply not homogenous or made up of composed of one group. It's diverse. The opposite of homogenous is diverse. And now you have a sort of cool vocabulary term you can pull out. The opposite word for diverse is homogenous. Okay. So we've been talking about this sort of diversifying of the labor force in the next, say, 10 years. But this piece around the age diversification or maybe homogenization of the workforce is interesting, right? So the Deloitte Millennial Survey shows us that about 75% of the workforce will be made up of millennials by 2025. Wow. And 2025 is only 5 years away. I'm still in Star Trek mode. In 2025, we'd all be like in spaceships. But okay, so that's coming, and it's happening now, right? It's not like it's, they're going 25% now, and it's gonna, right? We're probably moving somewhere between, like, each year getting closer to 75%. So this is happening now. That means that that workforce is going to make up certainly the majority of our workforce, but really is going to be changing the culture and some of the norms in our workplaces. But here's the thing that's interesting, right? The second point. But that 74% of those millennials believe that their organization is more innovative when it has a culture of inclusion. Wow. And that's a really interesting way to look at diversity. I think it's a little more cutting edge in terms of thinking about how to think about diversity. There are a lot of ways to think about diversity. I don't want to sort of go, I don't think it makes sense to go through all of them. I want to take this route for us today. At least is sort of bringing up some issues. I'm doing some work on innovation and how diversity can help us think about innovation and bring more innovation to our workplaces and to our economy. And so that this idea, sort of fleshing this out a bit more, is that this notion of a culture of inclusion, that is, everybody has a place at the table. Everybody's ideas, everyone has an opportunity to share their ideas, and we don't have just a sort of one or monolithic sort of culture in which we're creating new ideas, new products, et cetera, providing services, et cetera. I've been thinking a lot about innovation in the public sector. How do we, and are we not in a moment where we need to think innovatively about how we deliver public services? I'm gonna leave it there, but it's important, right? I want you to think about innovation beyond making widgets, but innovation in terms of solving problems. So if I can animate and get you excited about why it's important for us to think about diversity, I'm going to take this route. I can go a lot of different ways. I can pitch it a lot of different ways. But that it can, if we have a multitude of ways of problem solving, that can help us address our most vexing problems in the public sector and the private sector as well. So I want to frame this conversation as helping you think about how is your relationship with your career mentees. How can this issue be part of, instead of some of the difficult conversations that we have around race and gender, which are important. We got to think about those. But I'm bringing the optimism. Where are ways in which this can be an opportunity? Where are ways in which this can help develop and grow possibilities, both for your mentee, the workplaces that they are in, and the business and productivity that we as that those who that are affiliated with Penn State are creating out there in the world. And so this idea of a culture of inclusion is one in which the idea that if we have more people with varied backgrounds and ideas, this will make the company smarter, richer, more creative, and more successful. Is that optimism? Is that me? Is that that's optimism? I have been blown away by the survey, and I've been sharing it with a lot of people. Okay, I'm gonna stop this. Let me see. Let me stop the share for a minute. Okay, so so I want to, so then let me back down to, so that's a kind of large labor market economy level. This is, I tend to teach at that level, but let me then also talk about some of the issues that we are, that we're thinking about in terms of the sort of interpersonal relationships, these interpersonal interactions that we have around some of these issues, right? So, I'm going to talk a bit about what we call bias. And I also want to see if we have, well, I'm going to keep a chat window open. Okay, so this is a moment where we can start to think about, I'm going to start to, if there's some things that come up with you, feel free to share them. Okay, so I want to think about some of these interpersonal interactions, and let me give you a scenario or two that I've encountered. If we think about these workplaces, so this is great. Yay, we're gonna have a culture of inclusion in our workplaces, and in 5 years, apparently, most people in the workplace are gonna be pretty excited about this. But I think it's gonna be a little more rocky than that, right? I think that we're gonna have some problems to solve. And let's think about some of those interpersonal interactions, okay? So, the term that I think is most useful, and I'm a social scientist by training, the term that I think is most useful from social psychology and thinking about some of these issues is the notion of bias. Let's throw out racism and sexism. Let's throw those out for a minute. Social psychologists really help us think about this idea of bias. And I'm not saying that racism and sexism aren't an issue, but it's more useful in thinking about, in my opinion, in thinking about bias than some of those other big scary words. Okay, so here's the idea behind bias, and this has become a lot. This idea, implicit bias, some of you may have heard of this. This has really made its way out into the popular discourse in ways I'm very excited about. The New York Times has had a number of really excellent teaching pieces really about implicit bias and thinking about implicit bias in the workplace and our interactions in the workplace. So stop me if you've heard this one. Okay, so here's the basic idea. The idea is that we make these associations. This is what we mean by implicit, that our subconscious, we learn over time to make associations between a lot of things, a lot of different concepts or ideas or things. This is how our brains operate. That is, if I say peanut butter, you say jelly, right? Of course. If I say summer, you may say sand, sun, beach, etc. Those are those just automatic implicit associations that we make. What happens is we have a delicious swig of iced coffee. When it comes to the, this starts to play a role when it comes to the conversation that we're having, is that we learn to make these associations about people and people who we see and that we put in different groups. Our brains are also very big about categorizing, not just people, but things, right? We want to sort of, you know, I was looking out my window again, and again, another reminder, Central PA. Like I look out the window, this was, I don't know, about 6 months ago. I look out the window and I see a large, very large animal moving across. I live in a development 2 miles from the stadium. I live in this quiet little development. And I'm thinking, that's a dog. That's a really large, oddly large dog. That's not a dog, that's a bear. So our so we think, psychologists think our brains have developed to make those associations between things and objects for our safety, right? That's how we, you know, like I was looking out my window seeing this with my, at the time, 7-year-old daughter, right? So we have to defend and protect ourselves, and our brains have developed that tendency to make those associations to help us navigate our physical environment and also our social environment, right? Okay, so that doesn't make us bad people. That's just what we do. but what we start to do when this again becomes an issue, what we start to do is that we place those associations in helping us make decisions in other contexts, in the work context, etc. Let me give you a example. I was going to Home Depot, and my daughter at the time was, I don't know, 2 or 3, some ungodly young age in which she is really difficult and tiresome. And I was exhausted. I had taught that day, and I was exhausted. And we were going to look for we had a very like a bar sink faucet, and it had to be very particular dimensions and fittings and whatnot. And it was there with my family, my husband at Home Depot. And anybody else have this problem? My husband at Home Depot, like if a minimum visit to Home Depot is 2 hours, I had no interest in being at Home Depot for 2 hours with a 2-year-old. I was exhausted. I want to go home. So I was thinking strategically, right? We think strategically. How can I get this done in 15 minutes as quickly as possible and get out of here? So I thought, Home Depot would hire plumbers. They would hire contractors often who wanted just a stable paycheck to staff and who would also be more knowledgeable. So I said, okay, I'm going to look for a plumber. Let me look for someone who works here who's a plumber. They can help here. He or she can help me find this very particular faucet very quickly. Okay, so I'm walking, and now I'm on a mission. I'm looking for this person, and so while I'm searching, this young petite woman walks up to me and she says, "Hi, may I help you?" She clearly worked there. She's very pleasant and clearly willing to help me. I barely look at her, and I keep walking, and I say, "No, thank you. I appreciate it. No, thank you." And I'm from Texas. I have to say I appreciate it. I keep walking. I take 3 steps where I realized what I was doing. And I turned around and I said, "I need a 3/4 inch bar sink that has this fitting, this fitting." She said, "Do you want such and such or such and such?" What I realized happened was that when I in my head wanted a plumber, I was looking for a man, possibly with a low hanging belt kind of, like I had the stereotype in my brain about what a plumber was. And when this woman came up to help me, who worked there, who's willing to help me, who's available, I said, "No, she doesn't fit that stereotype, so she can't be a plumber and she cannot help me." And I made that decision, even though I teach this in my classes all the time. I took 3 steps before I figured it out. And I turned around and I said, "This is what I'm looking for." She knew exactly what I needed and took me right to it. We were done in 5 minutes, not 15. But here's the thing. I tell people that because I want them to, I'm a woman. At the time, I was a youngish woman. And that I was we could call it sexist, but psychologists say it's about what was going on in my mind was bias. That is, I made those associations well before I was buying kitchen faucets. I made those associations about who could fill that position, who had competency in that particular need that I had at the time. And that person and instead of thinking, okay, someone who has the ability who has that kind of, technical ability, I filled that in with a gender, and maybe in some ways even a race. I'm sure I was looking for a white guy who was a plumber. And that association gets made, TV, all kinds of, all the cultural things that we're surrounded by. With respect to race and gender, psychologists tell us that by the age of around 3, and certainly between 3 and 5, that most kids have learned race and they have learned gender. That is, we have to learn it. I'm a sociologist, right? And any of you who are parents, you must remember a time when your child didn't use the word even girl or boy, much less Black or white or Asian or Jewish, right? They didn't use those words. We had to teach them those words. And more importantly, they get taught not necessarily just by their parents, but all kinds of influences. I decided I didn't want my daughter to be a princess girl. This was a decision I made. I was outmatched. Outmatched by the teachers in the daycare here at Penn State. We went to a lovely, fine daycare here at Penn State. The teachers, the other girls, By the time she was 3, literally, she had multiple dresses. I got her pretty dresses, but she and her friends had a whole princess at the school, had a whole princess parade, which I was, demanded that I bring all of her pretty dresses in so they could all princess out. This was so out of my control. I had another parent say, you're not gonna win this fight. And so those are what we call those are socializing influences, right? And they come from a lot of ways. And more importantly for us to think about is that all of us have had that. I, in the middle of Home Depot, didn't instantly become sexist, but that I had been, my brain had been imbued and filled with all of these various associations that help me, that are part of me making sense of my physical and also my social world. And so translate that into workplaces, hiring decisions, interactions with your mentee, interactions that your mentee will experience while looking for work. I have encountered difficult stories. Some of you may have. I invite you to share them with me. I remember a student, one of my best students in my class, applied for a job. She was literally a 4.0 student. She's a Black woman. And she had a 4.0 GPA, and she applied for this job. She was so excited about it. She got a call back, an over the phone interview. And the hiring manager was so excited. She's like, "You look great on paper." But she said, just for completion's sake, why don't you come in for a face-to-face interview? And this is common and this is important. Nor is it racist. It's just how we make decisions is in our firms. And so she did, and she walked in, and the woman who had interviewed her, who had been really positive and excited and almost hired her all over the phone, stared in disbelief that she was staring at a Black woman, and that she had heard over the phone. She thought perhaps we presume that she never said directly, but we presume that she thought she was white. She heard a voice. I used to get teased all the time when I lived in a predominantly, Black neighborhood. People say, "You sound white," so, you might hear me and not see me and presume that I'm white. And we think that's what happened in this case. And so the woman was very hurt and chilly, and eventually didn't offer her the job once she saw her face to face. So she had one decision about her that she was very clear about. Like she over the phone said, "I think you're a perfect fit. We'd like to hire you." She was very clear about that. But when she actually showed up, and then on her resume, right, that, this is just, you have all of what we need. This looks great. And eventually didn't hire her. And I've heard many stories. I've experienced similar things myself. And so we have to deal with the way in which bias can affect our assessment of the qualifications of people. We also have to think about how that affects our interactions in our workplace, how that affects career mobility opportunities for your mentee, for yourselves over time. So let me give you a few examples. And I'll stop anytime I get a chat. And I'm going to finish 2 points, and then I'll actually just open it up generally to a conversation. So one, there have been a number of what we call audit studies that actually get a sense of to what extent there is this bias among employers in hiring. And those studies have been disconcerting. So one of the more famous ones got so much attention, it showed up in the presidential debate when George W. Bush ran, in which we found that Black and white men, and these are actually, they were students, college students who were used in the Milwaukee area, who were given the same resume and would go apply for jobs. they were called back less often, even though they had the same qualifications in these resumes that were fabricated. This study has been replicated. There are famous economists who did a similar thing using mail-in resumes at the same time. So they did 5,000 of these and have had very similar results. And thank you. I see your question, Dan. And then we see a similar thing with now people using internet, doing these studies using internet application of jobs, and we see a similar thing. So those are the dynamics that we're dealing with, and I think having a more realistic and practical understanding of the challenges you're facing. I spent half my childhood with my grandparents, my grandfather was a World War II veteran. So they were very practical, right? So these are problems that we have to solve, not, oh, darn, it's just awful, it's never gonna work. No, they're just problems you solve. That's how you keep optimism while being both practical at the same time. So, so I'm gonna move over to Dan's question. There's some more things I can sort of raise, but I'm gonna move over to Dan's question. I guess everybody's just a panelist. So I'm going to make sure that, so I'm going to read this. There's a question from Dan. So what can we do as mentors to prepare a mentee for an interview situation which goes south once the interviewer sees that an applicant is a minority? That's a great question, Dan. And I'll answer it myself, and then I'd be interested in other people's ideas. And I see a question here about being allies, and this is a really important kind of conversation we're having now around how to be allies that we're seeing more in the public discourse, which I think is really important. So, so I think I want to the first question around how to be to prepare a mentee. I just sort of like I was saying before, this can do attitude, this never give up, this whatever negative experience I'm experiencing is not about me, it's not about this person, and I will not give up until they push and shove me out of the room. I don't know, that's what I'm thinking. Let me give you a quick example. When I finished my PhD at University of Michigan, took me 3 years until I could start to get interviews at research universities. It was a long slog. It was really a really difficult time. I did postdocs, but 1 year I went literally unemployed and just lived off my husband. And so finally I got these job I got these interviews. Not only did I get an application, but I was in the top 3. I got a fly out. So I go to a university of Connecticut, and you have to, when we're interviewing as professors, you have to understand I had 3 years of just slogging through. So now I finally get a chance. So I'm ready to go. When you interview as a professor, you have to go to each professor's individual office and have one-on-one meetings in addition to a big presentation that you give. So I was in this one guy's office, and he refused to talk to me. He literally, I'm going to show you. I do this with my students. I'm going to show you what happened. Pretend you're me. You're talking to me. This is what this guy does. He literally has his back to me, and he's typing on his computer with his back to me while I'm trying to talk to him, looking at his back. And there's a moment and I was like, this guy is not, I said, this guy is not on my side. And the first thing I thought is, he's not going to get in the way of me and a job. I survived a PhD at University of Michigan. I went through 3 years of waiting. No, if you can get to that moment, right? That this wasn't about me, and this wasn't don't imbibe that. Don't, oh, I'm not good enough. He doesn't like me, so this isn't going to happen. No, I was raised by the greatest generation. No. So I noticed that. So one was a never give up, can do attitude. 2 was be creative, think on your feet. I try you as a college professor, and I want you to be able to, I'm sure you out in the workforce know the importance of this, is the ability to think on your feet for for everybody, no matter your race or gender or whatever, we got to be able to think on your feet. Here's what I did in that situation. Was I noticed a garden map on his, since I was staring at his back, I noticed a gardening zone map. Now I had just taken up, we just started gardening. We were renting a house. I had never gardened before. So I was like, I learned what gardening map is. So instead of, I was pointlessly talking about my research, he didn't want to hear anything about that. So I just said, oh, do you garden? Here's what happened. Okay, sorry. Yes, I do. He was absolutely excited to talk about gardening. We had this, he lit up. It was bizarre. I don't know why, but that was his thing. Hang in there, be creative, think on your feet. That guy came to my presentation, sat on the front row center, smiled the whole time. I got a job offer. So look, let's just hang in there. I think that, again, that ability to think on your feet, and I think definitely for people who are experiencing various those kinds of barriers, those things are absolutely crucial. I have been we lost Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I have been told, I watched several years ago the movie about her life and the difficulties that she faced, and all the doors slammed in her face. And I was trying to motivate my students this semester, and I was saying, I look to another idea is to point out people before them, like, you're not the first one to struggle. And the people that you admired who got there, they didn't get there because they were magical. They got there because they didn't give up. It sounds simplistic, but don't give up. And then I'm saying, I love this question. Any tips by Christopher? Any tips for white allies to be effective allies to underrepresented minorities, despite the inability to truly empathize with them and experience what they have and do experience? So I think this notion of allyship, that is, how can you be supportive of a group that's experiencing something that you may not experience? And I think that's absolutely crucial. And there's a lot of work, and I would encourage you to Google some of that work. There's, there are amazing presentations going on here at the university about specifically how to be allies in that context. And so I think even the notion that embedded in your question is part of the answer, right? Is that there's an inability to truly empathize. And so that doesn't mean you can't empathize, but that there is some part of it that you're never going to get. And if you get that, you're halfway there. That part of this is understanding that this is, unless you walk through this experience, there's part of it that you won't understand. But there are similar experiences. There are ways in which all of us have been excluded. We don't feel comfortable. We have been rejected. And if you can draw on some of those experiences, that will be helpful. But also the importance of, this person is experiencing something that I don't fully, truly understand. And that actually opens up a type of communication in which you can learn. This is the key thing that we talk about in allyship, is ask questions. Let me pull this up really quickly. This is another lecture I share. Oh, here it is. Okay, another lecture I share with my students in management about when we talk about diversity management. And these are, okay, here, I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to share my screen again. Thank you, Chris. I see that. I think absolutely finding ways in which you connect in with some type of that experience, but also giving that space for the fact that part of this is something that you can't. I'm getting a security alert. I don't know. Okay, so this is from a part of a lecture that I give, and I borrowed this from. There are these career workshops that we have for staff here at the university about these kinds of conflicts in the workplace. So this is at the end of the discussion, it was, here are some things that you can do to sort of overcome this. This is the first piece is pay attention. And this is that's what I said, Chris was, I think, embedded in your question was the answer, is that if you understand that the part of this you can't get, that allows you to pay attention. Because then you're like, no, I don't understand. And the only way I can understand is to listen. And that listening has always, in anything in allyship, in the recommendations for allyship, the first thing always is listen. Because the second is related to that. Be cognizant of your own lens. By that we mean be aware of your own perspective, that your perspective is only one perspective. I like to think about this as a big, huge elephant. And this huge elephant has, if we're standing on different sides or parts of the elephant, we'll see different aspects of it. And that you're only on one side of the elephant. And there's not a right side or wrong side, they're just different sides, right? But that your lens is one lens. And if you want to understand somebody else's lens, you need to go over there and figure out what's going on their side of the elephant. I saw a really neat thing by Deepak Chopra, who has helped actually in negotiations with countries. And one of the most important, this was in the New York Times a few weeks ago. And one of the things that he said was, you can't possibly, it was actually in the midst of all that's going on and all the conflict that's going on. He says, you can't possibly understand, negotiate effectively, and come to a solution with another person unless you understand what their values, what they care about, what's at stake for them. When you understand all of that, then you can begin to effectively negotiate. That blew my mind. Be willing to listen, right? Again, all this really has this idea about sort of perspective and communication and openness, and the fact that communication has two sides of it. And when I said that, I remember my brain, I just realized I've been going very one way. I'm going to change it in just a minute. Seek feedback when unsure or when necessary. I say the other thing I say when I'm teaching this to graduate students is, be willing to say you're sorry. The first thing I said to that woman in Home Depot, and the many other gaffes I've made, is I'm sorry. And I told her, not only that I told her what I wanted, but I said, I assumed that she knew exactly what I was saying. She didn't seem surprised. She knew exactly what had happened. And that I had this sort of cliche stereotype. But I said to her, I'm sorry. And I said, the ability and importance, it's not being so caught up in the gaffe, but getting past the gaffe, right? We don't want to be so terrified of messing it up and offending someone that we don't communicate. What happens in a lot of my classes, that are all of my classes are overwhelmingly white, is that people just are quiet. The white students, especially white men, are quiet and don't say anything. And I don't think that's good or bad. I think some are doing it out of respect, but I think that it doesn't advance the conversation for us. So I want to encourage you to feel confident to advance the conversation, but doing so in a way that is respectful, that is cognizant of your own lens. One, advancing the conversation, not such in that you're doing all the talking, but that you're listening, you're asking questions. That's this next point. Seek feedback when you're unsure. Do I say your name this way or do I say it this way? Do you prefer to be called this or to be called that? And then when you say it wrong, just say, I'm sorry, mean it, and move on. I believe in the good intentions of good people who don't get it right all the time. And I'm one of those people. And one of the reasons I like to share as a Black woman, I like to share ways in which I can be sexist and racist, is that it helps us all understand that this isn't something that's permanent and immutable, but that only is, certain, we all learn these stereotypes, right? We all learn these cliches. But this is something we're all kind of have this, inclination toward. But that the issue is but the turning point is that we acknowledge it and that we address it. And we find ways to do so. I like to use a lot of humor. I like to put people at ease, and then I like to listen and to be open to people's different perspectives and different ways of thinking about it. Demonstrate and model these behaviors as leaders and managers in workplaces when you're working with your mentees. If you use inclusive language, if you make you don't know how important you can make someone feel when you say this is an issue, not something they're always complaining about. I have to present a new policy specialization that we're doing in school policy on race, equity, and justice. And this idea was brought up by the two white men heading our school, who brought this to me. He said, Nikki, I think this is important. I think we should do this. And I was like, that's awesome. That is not just me. That's awesome. It means so much. So if you are bringing up some of these issues, I think it makes such a difference to people. There's a lot of burden that are on people in these marginalized and groups. There's an enormous amount of burden. There's an enormous amount of discomfort. And we shame people into being silent and not talking about their own, that they're just complaining or they're playing the race card. That can be stressful when you're really experiencing some of these things, but there's a sort of double burden when people say, but you can't say you're experiencing those things. So if you have someone in your corner who's saying, no, I think that stuff isn't real, I think it's important, and I'm willing to help you think through it. I'm willing to be a, and that's a piece of allyship, is willing to be someone who's, okay, I see a question. I said, we should be willing to listen. I'm gonna listen. Okay, I'm gonna stop my share. I'm gonna go over to, Lauren, can you help me? I see someone in Q&A saying, I'm sorry. And then Lauren, do you think it's okay to open up the unmute the mics or something?
Yeah. What I'll do is I'll go through and just allow everybody to talk. And then obviously you don't have to. I think it'll still have your mic muted. And I don't think you'll be able to use your camera, but you will be able to talk and unmute yourself. So I'll just have to go through and do that individually.
Thank you. Okay.
Yeah.
There's some if there's a raise, we can just people. I don't know if there's a raise hand thing, or I don't know if there's a raise hand option, or if people just unmute and just start talking, and we'll see if we have an issue with that.
Yeah, sounds good. All right. I think everybody should be unmuted at this point.
Okay. Someone asked about books. So while you talk about if you have a someone asked about what are your favorite books on, you ask don't ask a professor about books, please. Okay, so you have, and I want, if someone either has a question, but also if there's just if there's a scenario, if someone has a scenario that someone's dealt with, you're like, here's this crazy thing that happened. If someone wants to throw that out, you're welcome to too, while I look for books. Okay, go.
All right, I'll start. My name is Seth Hernandez, as the screen says.
Hi, Seth.
Welcome, everybody. Hello. So I would just say on the allyship portion or question, you know, as a person of color, born and raised in a very, I guess, Caucasian community, conservative town here in California. I was raised, you know, with not too many families of color in my elementary, junior high, elementary and junior high. And I would say, I mean, I'm still having conversations with people I've gone to school with since kindergarten about this upcoming election and whether they're going to, you know, vote one way or the other. And I think as far as an allyship, one of the things that I think those who aren't, you know, wouldn't necessarily identify themselves as a minority, that would be really helpful for those who do, would be to share our stories, right? There's the saying that just because it doesn't happen to you doesn't mean it's not happening. And that is the case. I mean, I have been followed in stores. I have been pulled over and taken out of the car when my two blonde friends were left in the car and I was patted down. I have been told by a grocery worker, my first job was bagging groceries. I've been told by, you know, one of my old former colleagues that all Mexican males are just bad people. You know, we've been pulled over as adults in Idaho, and my wife, who wouldn't necessarily wouldn't say that she is a person of color or minority, was fearful. Hindsight, she told me about this after when we got pulled over in Idaho. all these things happen. You know, we all went to Penn State or teach Penn State or whatever it may be, right? We share that commonality, right? But there's certain aspects in our lives where we don't. And if you can listen to friends, colleagues, family members, you know, in-laws, whoever it may be that do identify and have stories like that, like this, and then share those with others who don't, I feel like that would be really beneficial.
That's a great, I thank you, Seth, so much for sharing that. I appreciate that. I spent a little more than half my youth in San Antonio, Texas, and seeing some of both its situation for Blacks, but also Latinos as well. And that moment, the idea of listening when people have some of these experiences. So there was a guy who started a magazine, a white guy called Diversity Inc. And they do, and you might look into it in some of your work. I think this might be helpful. You know, they have diversity rankings for companies and articles on dealing with some of these issues in the workplace. And he came to, I was on the faculty at Rutgers and the management school at Rutgers. And when he came, we invited him to come talk to us about what were some ways we could connect with what he was doing. And he was so passionate about this. And he's a white guy, and he was so passionate about this. And after the meeting, I walked up to him and I said, what was the moment for you? And he looked at me and he knew exactly what I meant. And what I meant was, what was that moment when you started to see that this was a real thing? And that I find that that the vast majority of white folks that I too was raised in predominantly white schools. There was a moment when I was the only Black student in a school when I was in San Antonio, Texas, in the 80s, yay, of a white school. And so I thought that I spent my childhood and most of my life in predominantly white environments, and most people just didn't see it the way God got it the way he did. And I knew there was a moment, there was a conversion moment, right? And you know exactly what it was. It was about working with a Black colleague who would tell him again and again what he experienced. And he always was just like, blah, 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 blah. No, you're just making this up. It's not real. Like the kind of constant, we call colorblind response. But all of a sudden it just hit him, and he turned and he saw a look on this, he's just explaining to me, he saw a look on his face, and he saw the suffering, the difficulty. And some of the most amazing situations I've been in is when I've been accosted. I've had many of them. I don't want to, bring you down. But when I've been accosted with and there's a white, either it's happened with a neighbor, friends or whatnot. I was accosted by the police when we were walking away from, I went to this very small undergrad, and that was next to this really, really fancy neighborhood. And I was walking my friend back. She was a white woman, and the police pull over. What are you doing in this neighborhood? And there are two of us walking, but they're talking just to me. But what was interesting was my friend was like, why are you talking to her like that? Why? And it was, what is fascinating is these moments when they're shocked by white friends or colleagues or neighbors see this, and they never thought this happened. They never thought this was a thing. And so I've been in situations where I'm like, calm down. I'm used to this. I'll walk you through it. Here's what we say next, we're gonna get through this. Like, they're shocked, right? So anyway, that's interesting. Okay, I just want to share, Susan Ross is I don't know, Susan, if you want to talk, but I see this question in the chat. If our mentee is a white male, what suggestions do you have to sensitizing that person to issues of diversity and inclusion? So I think there was a lot of, I thought about this, there are a lot of ways we could kind of go, right? That people themselves are minorities, or they're menteeing someone who's a minority and they're white. And so this one becomes more and more difficult. It depends on your perspective. It depends on your knowledge, how comfortable you feel, but also how knowledgeable you feel. I just saw, this was really interesting. Here's an idea I have, and then I'll open up to see if other people have ideas. I just saw on how to talk to people about, this is, about the election, but how to talk to people by psychologists. What's a sort of useful way to talk to people who think differently than you do? And his suggestion was interesting, right? He said, look, you're never going to directly change someone's mind right there on the spot. And that sort of bulldozing and confronting them, it has to be this way, you're saying it wrong, isn't terribly effective. He said, it's very similar to the Deepak Chopra thing, was ask them questions. Why do you tell me what your experience is like? Have you heard of different experiences? Why do you think he or she may have that different experience? So in class, I use a New York Times article about, they had really done well about the experiences that 2 times the unemployment rate for Black male college graduates is twice that of white male college graduates. Ouchie, 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 right? Because education is supposed to be the solution, right? But we're still looking at those disparities even among those who have college degrees, and that's difficult. So we say, right, so we talk through then, why do you think there are these disparities? Why do you think what do you think might be happening? What do you think the experiences, what do you think that might feel like for someone who walked across that Penn State graduation stage, but then to be faced with this difficult experience? It can be really demoralizing. And then he said to address not their decisions, and their stance, but their values. Again, what do you think should happen in the workplace? What do you think should happen in terms of hiring? And then start to introduce this idea that some of the things that are happening don't meet their values. And then he said to not expect them to change right there on the spot for you. You're not going to get the satisfaction. This for me was like, oh, darn. But I really had been kind of coming to this in my own experience. He's like, they're going to go home and they're going to think about it. And some of them might have that aha moment, but they're rarely going to share that with you. I would have my students come and say, back in the dorm, the students were arguing with you. With you. And I thought, oh my goodness, I wish they would disagree with me in class. But I talked to someone about this, one of the other professors, and she's like, oh my goodness, no, they're talking about it. They're in the dorms talking about your class and not like other stuff. That's a win. That's why I said the issue here is communication. It's not right or wrong, it's communication. That's where we as human beings, no matter what we're talking about, that's where we as human beings, we advance, civilization advances when we can communicate effectively and start to come together and really sort of, move forward on new ideas, some consensus, some common ground. That's what he said. He said, keep the conversation going. When you're butting up against people, that stops the conversation. He says, work to keep the conversation going. And conversation, and what his suggestion was, and my experience is that conversations with the other people, that's why I started off with saying, are going to work when you ask questions, when you give everybody a voice, right? And that will continue these. Thank you, Dan. I appreciate your comments. I'm going to read this other question, and then I'm going to open up while I'm reading this question silently. Anybody else have other things they want to share with us? We're running out of time. I will read this question. I think this is a really interesting question as well. What's an effective way for white people to speak to one another about diversity inclusion, such as the further hiring of BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color? One can run the risk of suggesting that the other person is racist, even though that's not the case, the intent. I think it's so interesting. I am getting this question a lot, where there are people who are there are white folks who are ready to fight the fight. This is exciting. They want to go out there. They don't want just me or another person of color. And they're really taking this idea that, yeah, we gotta give the people of color a break. They have been fighting this fight. They need to, true allies and soldiers. And so, but what I've heard is the same thing, that they are, when trying to convince other people, have run into conflict, that There are other people who don't see it like you and are reacting with what is a very, very, a very normal, is that a thing? Normal colorblind response. This is what we have learned in the US. This one reminds me, especially since we've run out of time, that the sort of knee-jerk reaction that this isn't a thing, this isn't real, you're making it up, and this country is fair and just and works just fine. And I always think we should finish the sentence. For me and people who look like me. Okay, right, so this is the idea of the elephant, right? Okay, so I am going to end with, we've sort of talked about these things. Okay, well, sort of like then talk to me about that. Well, what do you think about this? What's important to you? Why do you think this happened? And how many people of color are actually at your workplace? Do they do the same things you do, et cetera, et cetera? Okay, books. I'm going to share some books with Lauren. What I have here, this is kind of my favorite. It's called Racial Formation. This is really just a more about, thank you, Thandy, I appreciate that. It was Tandy or Thandy. But I'm going to say this is called Racial Formation. This really helps us understand how race and racial conflict really kind of gets constructed in a much more sort of sophisticated way than I think we tend to think about it. I'm going to send a list to Lauren. There's also there are a number of books. One of the book, I want to find some more books on allyship, but there's a book that I can't remember. It came to me and then it left me. I'm going to send some ideas to Lauren and even some websites because that may have a more interactive. One thing I'm going to really, really quickly, just off the top of my head, pbs.org/race. That's really easy. I'll put it in here. And they have just, it's teaching you about what race and what race isn't in the US, right? That race isn't biologically a significant concept, and they sort of help explain that. But they also explain so it's sort of more about those, but it's just off the top of my head. And that's a place where you can do some more learning. But I will share with Lauren a list of things. Oh, that was it. There was a great book. That was the one I was thinking, but there's a great book by a sociologist who's in a management school at Rutgers about talking to, oh, I love this. Yes. Oh, do I have it here? I'll share it. Yes, I'll send, I don't remember the title, but about interviewing 200 whites about, okay, well, how did you make it? And they talk about their stories. And then what we find in their stories is that it was a friend, it was somebody who hooked them up, and then they couldn't, sort of helping them put together that it was about these sort of, these networks and opportunities that were given to them. Then they asked them, well, what do you think is the problem with minorities? And they're like, oh no, because they're not trying hard enough. That's great. She does a really nice job. So I'll share some of these things with Lauren, and hopefully there's a listserv that she can share. I really appreciate everyone's engagement, listening, and the time you took today, and the work that you're willing to do to do this. Just your willingness and your intent is going to be more than you need to get in there and get it done. Thank you.
Oh my gosh, Nikki, thank you so much for your time and expertise today. I know I was taking notes as I was going through and listening to your presentation too. I think that this is such an important topic, especially when we're talking with students and within the workplace. So I will be sending this, this session has been recorded, so I will be sending that out, as well as Nikki's book recommendation list once you get that to me. And I feel like, oh my gosh, this could have gone on for another hour. I feel like it.
It always does. Yeah.
But so for everybody in the audience, just to let you know, the next and our last fall webinar of our series will be on November 18th. We have a professor from Labor and Employment Relations who are going to talk about generations in the workplace, which I think connects to some of what Nikki was talking with us at the very beginning of her presentation as well. So thank you all so much for being here today. And thank you again, Nikki, for your time. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. It was nice talking to you. Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Thanks.